Also, at the closing session this morning, Party General Secretary Tolam extended condolences to families in localities affected by recent floods and storms at the closing sessions of the 13th Party Central Committee Conference on October 8th.
He called on the entire political system to prioritize recovery efforts immediately. He expressed sympathy for the people's losses while commending forces, agencies and local authorities for their dedication and courage in disaster prevention, rescue and recovery operations. The party leader also urged localities to take urgent action to address the aftermath of storms, floods and landslides. He emphasized the need to mobilize all resources to protect lives and property, ensure everyone has food, shelter, and medical care, stabilize education, and remain proactive in responding to complex weather conditions through the end of 2025.
Authorities continue rescuing and assisting elderly residents and children in flood-hit communes of Lạng province late into the night of October 7th. In areas such as Tân Tiến, Tràng Định, Thất Khê, and Hữu Lũng, flood waters continue to rise and power outages have persisted since the afternoon.
In the center of Thất Khê commune, water levels exceeded 2 meters in some areas.
This is the second flood this month, and I've been having such a hard time. Today I asked the rescue team for help, and as soon as we reached the pier, the officers welcomed us warmly.
Floodwaters from Bắc Khê River caused severe flooding downstream throughout the night. More than 1,000 soldiers, police officers, and local forces worked tirelessly to evacuate residents to safety.
Mobile units from the Provincial Military Command deployed 500 officers and soldiers. With water levels rising, we are directing efforts throughout the night to move residents to the safest locations.
Despite having to stay up all night, we are determined not to leave anyone behind and ensure all residents and their belongings reach safety.
This area is a known flood hotspot in Lạng province. For many years, prolonged heavy rains have caused severe flooding in these communes. The recent hydroelectric dam failure has only heightened residents' worries. Support from the community and authorities has provided comfort to flood-affected residents, though the situation continues to present significant challenges.
Cao Bằng province faces a second historic flood while still recovering from Typhoon Bulai. Typhoon Matmo has now caused additional severe damage. Rainfall has exceeded 200 millimeters in many areas, resulting in deep flooding. River levels have risen rapidly, surpassing alarm level 3. Local authorities and residents are working around the clock to combat the floods.
Relentless downpours have caused rising river levels and blocked roads. With soil moisture exceeding 85% in many areas, the risk of landslides and flash floods has increased significantly. Fortunately, early awareness campaigns in riverside communities have helped minimize damage.
Water levels are still rising. Residents in houses that seemed safe before are now moving their belongings to higher ground.
Hundreds of officials, soldiers, and local forces have been deployed, remaining on duty for days despite heavy rain to provide assistance to residents.
We do our best to move residents' belongings to safe places. We have been on duty for nearly a week. Forecasts were issued in advance, and residents were informed to take precautions. At the same time, authorities and local agencies assisted people in moving some belongings out of their homes.
The province declared a state of emergency, directing local authorities to implement response plans, activate the 24/7 disaster prevention system, monitor high-risk areas, and relocate over 250 households. Officials have instructed hydropower plants to follow proper operating procedures and issue timely flood discharge warnings to downstream communities.
The General Staff has issued an urgent directive for all military units to focus on preventing floods, landslides, and riverbank erosion in northern Vietnam. Military regions are working with local authorities to evacuate residents from high-risk areas with the protection of human lives as top priority. Troops have been deployed to reinforce dikes, deliver food and supplies, and access deeply flooded zones to ensure no one is left hungry or homeless. Military commands have been instructed to mobilize personnel and equipment across regions to monitor vulnerable areas, access flood risks, and quickly relocate people from low-lying or riverside communities to safety.
And recent storms and heavy rains have cost nearly $40 million in damage to Vietnam's road infrastructure. According to the Ministry of Transport, provincial and national roads under local management account for more than 90% of total losses. Meanwhile, 25 sections of highways and expressways managed by regional road authorities were temporarily blocked, but have now largely reopened to traffic. Repair and recovery efforts continue nationwide as authorities address the impact of recent flooding.
Heavy rain in northern Vietnam is expected to ease by Tuesday afternoon, but river levels may take another 1 to 3 days to recede as many remain dangerously high. In Cao Bang and Thái Nguyên provinces, 2 rivers have already surpassed historical flood levels. As of 11 p.m. Tuesday, the Bang River at Bang Giang station in Cao Bang peaked nearly 1 meter above the 1986 record. At 4 a.m. today, the Cầu River at Gia Bai station, Thái Nguyên province, also peaked, exceeding the 2024 record by 1.09 meters. Water levels are now falling slowly, forecast to remain about 1.25 meters above alarm level 3 today. On the Cầu and Thương rivers in Bắc Ninh province, floods are rising. The Thương River is expected to surpass the 1986 record around midday. The National Civil Defense Steering Committee swiftly delivered over 13,000 buoys to support flood-affected residents in Lạng Sơn on the night of October 8th. Additional equipment, including rescue boats, life jacket, raft, and rope launchers, is also being urgently dispatched to isolated areas. Rising water levels in the Hy Cung Chung and other local rivers have caused widespread flooding, forcing more than 2,000 households to evacuate. Many parts of Hà Giang 1 and Hà Giang 2 wards in Tuyên Quang province are still without access to clean water, leaving several households struggling with daily necessities. Local authorities are urgently implementing temporary measures to support residents. Clean water is being sourced from 700 cubic meter tank in Hà Sơn urban area. It is then pumped into trucks and delivered to a 30 water tanks set up by the Hà Giang 1 ward, where residents can collect it free of charge. The main water plants serving both wards have resumed operations after repairing flood-damaged equipment. It now runs with 2 pumping stations, delivering over 700 cubic meters per hour. However, due to a sharp rise in demand, many areas still face water shortages.
And speaking regionally, in just 1 week, Vietnam, the Philippines, and southern China have endured 3 tropical typhoons, Rakasa, Bulai, and now Matmo, striking in a rapid succession. When we think of typhoons, the first image that often comes to mind is fierce wind ripping through trees and buildings. But in reality, the most devastating impacts often come from water, both from the sea and the sky. As the climate warms, typhoons are becoming wetter, more intense, and slower moving, amplifying the risk of widespread flooding, landslides, and infrastructure collapse. This growing threat raises urgent questions about how storms, surges, and extreme rainfall contribute to the deadly mix of coastal and inland flooding, and why these dangers are increasing.
And today we're joined by Professor Carrie Emanuel from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to understand the science behind these destructive weather events. Professor Carey, when typhoons make landfalls, we often hear that it's not just the wind, but it's the water that causes the most damage. And as you said, can you explain how extreme rainfall and storm surges interact with what's in flooding?
So there are two sources of flooding in typhoons. One is strictly at the coast, and that arises from a phenomenon called the storm surge. The storm surge is identical to a tsunami that's caused by an earthquake, except that it's been caused by wind rather than an earthquake. But it's the same phenomenon. Once it's created, it behaves like a tsunami, and many people today have seen videos of tsunamis. They're pretty scary. Except that the tsunami arrives in the middle of a typhoon, and that can cause terrible coastal flooding. But along the coast and inland, particularly if you have hilly territory not too far from the coast, these typhoons can produce really, really torrential rain. And if they stall, they stop moving forward, they can rain for a long time, and this can cause catastrophic freshwater flooding from rivers and streams and just standing water.
Professor, we've also seen a rise in secondary disasters such as landslides and infrastructure collapse, which is really dangerous and has been quite common in provinces in Vietnam. So how does prolonged or extreme rainfall increase these risks?
The problem happens when you start shifting the climate so that a super typhoon that was once in 1,000 years becomes once in 100 years or once in 50 years. And then the infrastructure hasn't been built to take that, but it's happening more commonly. That's when you run into trouble. And all around the world, this is one of the big bad effects of climate change, is the changing what we call the tails of the risk, the really bad typhoons or floods or heat waves change their frequency quite a bit often in response to global warming, and that causes a lot more disasters.
Well, thank you very much for sharing with us.